Just the other day, Prydwen updated their tier list on their website and they have made some pretty significant changes to it. I'm actually astonished with some of the changes that they made, and I think it really starts to show how the game is going to be shifting as we get further and further into endgame. When we made our previous tier list on the channel, that was before the game's release, so we didn't have a completely full understanding of how the game will eventually go to once we get to endgame. But now that we have access to a lot of players and content creators getting to endgame, as well as getting a lot more information on how these units works, what teams are really good for them, and how flexible certain units are, we get a bigger picture of how the current game is unfolding. We also get to talk more in lengths about characters like Lucy and Piper, who I did feature on the tier list, but we didn't talk too much about them since we didn't have any actual playtime on them. Now that we can actually discuss how these units are, we can actually have a pretty solid conversation on the overall power level of all the units within the game. And you know what, I don't want to hold you guys up. Let's get ahead and look into this tier list, and as we can see, there has been some pretty nice shifts and changes to it. A lot of characters have been moved up, and so far they haven't moved anybody down as of recent. I just want to say for this tier list, we're not really going to be focusing on the really popular characters within the list, just because characters like Ellen and Lycan, you guys already know why these units are really strong. And to start this off, I want to talk about the character that has been considered pretty good since the release of the game, but not at the level she is marked at right now, and that is Sukaku. They have Sukaku now moved up to tier 0. I believe she was originally at tier 0.5, and this is only thinking of having one copy of her, which is Mindscape 0 or Cinema 0, whichever one you want to go by. And when looking at trying to figure out why they moved her up here, we have support characters directly buff the team or debuff the enemy in a major way, enough that brings team equals or outweighs the benefit of bringing another DPS or daze focused character. The best support characters take up as little time as possible while granting full access to their suite of buffs, maximizing both damage and daze, and field time for your stun and DPS characters to do what they do best. Criteria that impacts the rating for supports: major influence on rating, how powerful the support characters buffs are, and how many of the characters can directly benefit. The stronger the buffs and more universal, the better the rating. Medium influence on rating: how much or little field time the support character requires in order to perform their role, which I believe this should have a major influence on their rating as well, because on field time, definitely as we get into things like sheer defense, which has if I'm not mistaken, has a time limit, you want to be able to clear these things as fast as possible, so you want to be able to have units take up as little field time as possible. And then minor influence on rating: how much anomaly, daze, and damage a character can accumulate, inflicting on their enemies while still fulfilling their role as a support, which is understandable because these units aren't made or designed in order to really be inflicting anomaly, damage, daze, and damage. Their core goal is to support the team in order for them to do these roles. But when we come into the change logs, we see that the change to Sukaku was made just about 2 or 3 days ago, and it says Sukaku was shifted from tier 0.5 to tier 0. Sukaku has the strongest offensive generic buff in the game and excellent specialized elemental buffs, boosting up the current strongest element Ice, but with a downside of having a somewhat awkward ramp up time and a slow chain attack which can eat into valuable stun time on bosses. A week after ZZ's release, it's clear now that these slight downsides are easy and enough to play around, and in some cases even can be completely nullified. On top of this, Sukaku is seeing use even outside of her ice niche thanks to the raw flat attack she offers without the need to activate her additional team bonus, giving even Lucy a run for her money with a vortex buff Flight of Flag, which Lucy grants 600 attack and Sukaku grants up to 1000 attack, and for that reason we're putting her at tier 0. Now, a big thing that I want to point out with this is that with that verbiage there, this makes Sukaku seems really good, which she is. I believe keeping her at tier 0.5 would have been the better decision, because the core things I want to be talking about with her is that she provides these flat out attack values for anybody on her team, but I believe a bigger issue with Sukaku is the on-field time required for her to build the vortex stack charges in order to grant this flat out attack buff, as well as her issue of having easy to access to things like quick assist and switch tech and all of that sort. Okay, and what I mean by that is we think about Sukaku's kit, her main core elements about her is that she's very focused around building her vortex charges and being able to perform Flight of Flag. Now the thing about her vortex charges is that this is tied to her overall attack increase, and you need to be able to build these through either using her ES special attack, her chain attack, or her ultimate. being a support on a team, you don't really want to focus on using her ultimate, so this is something that you want to take out of the picture. Chain attacks is something that should be easily done, especially we have characters like Lycan on your team in order to trigger this as frequently as possible. And then with her EX special, this is something that she gains, I believe, either every time the EX special lands on the enemy or every time you trigger it for the first time. But the issue with that is that Sukaku is a very sluggish unit. She is the slowest support unit out of all the characters here, and it's one of the ones that I believe requires the most uptime on field in comparison to all of the support units here. But what makes her a much more valuable unit is that flat out attack buff that she provides at 1000 in comparison to Lucy's 600. Now, because she requires more on field time to get these vortex stacks, it plays into the thing I stated earlier, where I think a major influence on a character rating should be how much time they are required to be on field, because they're taking up time for the other units on their team to be using. Now, if we're talking about the mono ice team, I think Sukaku circumvents this, or just having another ice unit on her team, she circumvents this because she provides that additional 20% attack boost, meaning that even though she has this extra on-field time, she's providing an even additional damage buff for other ice units, making them make up that time with damage. But if she's a part of any other team that doesn't provide her any other ice units to buff and support, she just has that flat out. She's going to pretty much require herself to stay on field a bit more than what I believe a lot of players will like, especially with how sluggish she is, and the fact that in comparison to other units when it comes to using quick assist, she doesn't flat out gain access to use quick assist from just straight up using her chain attacks and her special. What Sukaku has to do is that she has to trigger these moves, and then she has to hold and transition into the flight of flag state in order to trigger a quick assist, which again adds more on field time for her to get things done. You can switch tech in this in order to save a little bit more time, but you want to gain access to that quick assist, because quick assist provides certain characters heavy benefits. Like, say for instance, maybe if you want to provide this flat out attack boost for a unit like Soldier 11, you want Soldier 11 to benefit within switching in to her quick assist, because then she automatically gets the ability to get fire suppression activated without having to manually time it. I think with that being said, I think Sukaku still is again a very good unit, but she's better off placed being right beside Reina within 0.5. Now, as we go along, I believe they even mentioned with somewhere within the criteria of the tier list that as we get further along and people start getting dupes of these A-range characters, we're going to start including the buffs that they get from their cinemas or their mindscapes. And I completely agree then that once we start considering comparing these A tier units to a C0 Reina, if we're talking about like a C3, C4 Sukaku, then we can start saying that, oh yeah, Sukaku is then placed within tier 0, because when we get copies of Sukaku, she becomes a much more monstrous support character than a lot of people will probably give her credit for. For instance, at C0, when Sukaku triggers her core passive Blade Banner or her group set medal, which is again the overall flat attack buff for anybody, and as well as the ice damage increase, she increases durations for 8 seconds. Mind you that both buffs are, I believe, a flat out 22-second duration, meaning she grants an overall 30-second duration of this when you get one copy of her. And then we have C2, where whenever Sukaku does a basic attack, a dash attack, a dodge counter, or a quick assist hit on an enemy, she has a chance of randomly gaining a stack for just performing any of these actions, which again allow us to get to this attack, this flat out 1000 attack boost a lot faster. I think having copies in mind makes Sukaku's a tier 0 unit. I can definitely agree with that, but having her only at M0 or C0, I feel like a unit like Reina just feels just as flexible as Sukaku, with the fact that she has her own flat out generic buff with pin ratio. It's still a very good stat to have, because it will tremendously increase your team's damage output, which is what both of these units are essentially doing. But the even better thing about Reina, in my opinion, is that Reina has some of the best high mobility in the game, right behind Grace, and she's able to provide quick assist and manipulate switch tech a bit better in this Sukaku, because she doesn't have to do any extra step after using her chain attack or EX special attack like Sukaku. Plus, with Reina being a part of the main made faction, she fits in and provides her additional team buff a lot more often than Sukaku, because Sukaku is only limited to providing her team buff with other people that match her element due to other section 6 members not being in the game currently. But not only did Sukaku get moved up within the support list, we also have that girl Nicole, who actually got shifted up as well. Nicole is a unit that I believe has been becoming better and better as you build her, because the main thing that's really good about Nicole is that she provides essentially a damage boost as well, but in the difference of providing a flat out defense reduction for anybody that joins her team. The issue with Nicole though is that she is a unit that honestly doesn't feel good outside of using her special and using her chain attack, so you only ever want to have her out on the field when those things are ready. But if they aren't, there's honestly no reason to switch into her, which overall kind of seems like a bad thing, but it's also a good thing because that means she doesn't take up any time on field honestly at all. She also synergizes pretty well with units like Ambi, Nekomata, Billy, which as we see here, Ambi's on T1, Nekomato's on T1, and then of course Billy's at T3, but she has this form of flexibility of being able to work with those units, which they all are different attribute anomalies, which means that she has the option of being able to work with very flexible teams that aren't only tied to her core element and the cunning hairs. Her only issue though is that with her additional ability, it requires you to have another ether unit on the team, and she is the only ether unit in the game at the moment. Now we are getting Jué Young within the next few days, I believe, by the time this video comes out, so she will have somebody that additionally works with her, but even still only having one extra unit to add to her flexibility to take advantage of her additional ability still kind of sits herself in this rough positioning of being T1, because until we get more ether units within the game, it kind of just sits here in hopes to mostly working with a lot of the other 4-stars within the game. And while we're here, we might as well talk about the last girl here, that girl Lucy. Lucy is a really good support character as well, as she provides minions. She provides her minion buffs, and she is a charge unit. So we come over here and looking at Lucy, we see that from her pros, she has up to 3 pet pig boards that attack, dealing a small amount of damage in days. Guard boards stay on the field and keep attacking even while Lucy leaves the field. Grants the whole squad, including Bangbu and guard boards, a 600 flat attack buff, assuming Lucy's own personal attack is high enough to cap out the buff. Very easy to play without much to do or mess around in order to bring out her full potential. Has different teams, she is very good, and few where she is even the best, making her flexibility in teams incredibly good. Doesn't require her additional ability in order to fully unlock her supportive capabilities, although she will lose some of her potential guard board damage. Has 2 separate EX moves to choose from depending on the situation at hand. Her cons are guard boards can sometimes have trouble keeping up and hitting faster enemies in melee range, leading them to chasing enemies instead of constantly attacking. Requires a higher amount of personal attack to grant her allies for a most powerful 600 flat out attack buff. So with all that being said, Lucy is a very good flexible unit on a lot of different teams, especially ones that pair with other fire units and Piper. One of the core teams that you're going to see with Lucy, a lot of people use, is going to be Lucy, Soldier, and Piper. Even something like Piper, Nekomata, Lucy. Those are really strong teams within the game, and the fact that she just overall provides a flat out 600 attack buffs is really good, even if it is a little bit lower than Tsukaku's. The overall difference within this is that Tsukaku's requires a lot more work to get this going, while Lucy, you're able to just quickly switch into her, get off your home runs and stuff with her, quickly switch off, still have the guard boards out there fighting, even if they do struggle fighting enemies that are a bit faster. But when we're talking about things within like shield defense, for the most part, there is a good much of ads that kind of either remain stationary, or they aren't that fast that the guard boards can't potentially catch up and help dealing a lot of massive damage. I think overall, Lucy's great core thing about her is that she is essentially a hybrid support, where I would say she's like a DPS support, where she's here to provide attack buff damage, but she's also passively providing attack buffs through her guard boards, especially when you're able to deal this additional damage with her against bosses. And then if you're able to trigger her additional ability that I believe the boards match her crit rate and crit damage, you're going to be pumping out massive damage with units on the team, especially with somebody like Soldier 11, who has possibly some of the highest potential of damage output when she gets her rotations going. I think having Lucy here at T1, especially if you only have one copy of her, makes very much sense. But similar to talking about like Tsukaku, when we look at getting future copies of her, she becomes pretty strong. And what I mean by that is we take a look at Lucy and we look at something like her C1 C1 and C2. Whenever her guard board launches a spinning swing, Lucy will recover 2 energy, and this 2 energy accounts for each pick on the field because they all have their separate cooldown, which means that she's able to get up to 6 energy, allowing her to trigger her EX special attack a lot more often. And then her big one is with C2, where when she triggers chain attack or an ultimate, she grants all of her squad members bang boost and the guard board to cheer on effect, and this is how you get your flat out 600 attack buff. That means that she no longer only needs to trigger her EX special attack in order to provide this buff, she can just do this with every other skill in her kit, which makes this buff even flat out insane and a lot easier to use, because a lot of times you're going to be triggering a lot of chain attacks with the core units you're going to be working with, like Piper and Soldier 11. Hey, but enough of the supports, let's talk about the stun units. For stun characters, the only one that has moved up in this category is the girl Anbi, and I'm not surprised at all. Anbi has been moved there from tier 2 to tier 1. Stun, specifically main field stun characters, have proven incredibly strong offensively and defensively in the hands of the community for the in-game shield defense progression. And when it comes to main field stun characters, Anbi finds herself wanted in many teams as she performs exceptionally well, outputting very competitive days, which allows her to closely compete with Lycan and Koledo despite only being an A-rank agent. For these reasons, we're raising Anbi up to a tier set with Koledo. Anbi and Koledo play quite differently, but we feel Anbi has a few standout traits when comparing the two, namely great dodge flexibility and attack speed, all while finding synergy in different teams and keeping up in days output. In our eyes, this is enough to warrant Anbi's move, and I completely agree, because Anbi is a very flexible unit that works on many different teams, regardless if she's able to trigger her additional team ability or not, because everything about Anbi is essentially trying to be selfish. Everything that is about her core kit is always about amplifying her days and benefiting her and not really her team overall. But being able to trigger days pretty often is the core benefit of her team, because she's also going to be able to trigger these chain attacks, going to be able to get other units to apply their buffs a lot more often, and so on and so forth. This is why we ever see a lot of runs with Anbi. She's not always a part of like an electric team or a team that includes other Cunningham members. She's able to fill in roles that a lot of other stun units aren't able to do, because she just flat out a really good unit standalone. Someone like Koledo, she's really good as well, but I think Koledo's true strength comes from being able to be paired with other fire units or other units a part of the Bella Ball faction, which isn't something that you always viably can do, and I think in some instances kind of limit her true strength to her. She also kind of somewhat relies on Ben for getting the additional buff she has when she's paired with them, but she doesn't overall need him. I think the big thing that's going to come into play with Anbi is that once we start counting towards having copies of her, which I've already started getting some, she becomes an even crazier unit than what she currently is right now at M0. If we come over here and just look at some of the mindscapes I have now, at her M1 we see that when the 4th hit of Anbi's base attack hits an enemy, her energy regeneration rate is increased by 12%. That means already I'm getting to the point within shield defense that every time I switch into Anbi, she always has her EX special attack, allowing her to inflict major days, really good damage, and also able to pull off some really cool combos. We also see that if you get her M2, when basic attack Thunderbolt hits a stunned enemy, its damage is increased by 30%, and when Anbi's EX special attack hits an enemy that is not stunned, the days inflicted is increased by 10%. That means as a unit, her overall DPS is being increased, as well as her days is being increase, making her a very formidable stun unit that you want on your team without requiring her to do anything out of the norm that she wouldn't already be doing. Again, I know this tier list is only including them being at M0 C0, but I just like to bring up the fact that once we get to the point where copies are going to be in favor of these units, we're going to want to talk about that more, because some of these characters, especially the A ranks, their copies are super good. Next up for the character shift, we have Grace, and Grace has been moved up to 0.5. Grace is an electric anomaly unit, and she is a very combo focused character, as well as being in the role of a sub DPS. Now, the main reason that they moved up Grace here, which we can come up and see, it's not a core reason for her alone, it's for anomaly units in general why they're being moved up. And it says anomaly characters are currently being used in a far wider variety of teams than in the closed betas, with a equally diverse array of combat strategies. Per pure elemental anomaly, crazy disorder reactions, or a mixture of both both are all seeing a good amount of success in in-game, even with just 2 Anomaly characters currently in the game with Grace and Piper. After testing these characters and after numerous conversations with the community, we feel it is appropriate to update the tier list and split the DPS into pure DPS and Anomaly DPS. The fact these characters deal their damage differently, stack different offensive stats, and prefer different team composition, all on top of actually playing differently in the combat means, and we think it's best that they be moved to their own category on the tier list. You can find a breakdown of what the Anomaly characters entail in the tier list criteria. Grace and Piper ratings have been updated with this in mind, which makes completely sense. A lot of people consider these characters as DPS units, but they aren't, like they mentioned before, they aren't the same type of DPS units as like an Ellen, a Nakamata, and a Soldier. Piper and Grace are being strong DPSs in a completely different way. What we mean by this is that their core identity or their core main focus of doing this is that they're inflicting heavy anomaly buildup while also doing really good damage overall. Them inflicting this anomaly allows them to be a part of what a lot of people are primarily focusing on, which is disorder comps. Disorder comps are going to be some of the best teams within the game, because getting that additional skyrocket of damage boost for your team, because you just triggered an elemental reaction, is really good to see. Not only that, but they're also really good on like mono teams as well. Grace being on a team with like Ambi, Anton, and her is overall a team that they just don't, enemy just don't get to play at all, because they're just constantly being shot, especially in the parts of Shiryu defense that are played with a lot of robot enemies. And an even better team would be Grace, Ambi, and Reina, which you can get that penetration buff damage when you switch into Grace on the field, and she is just going to be doing insane damage, as well as you get the execution down with her and being able to constantly toss grenades, stay at a distance from your enemies, always triggering your quick attach counter dodge. I think I said that completely wrong, but you guys know what I'm saying, the slow-mo effect into the counter hit, and always triggering her ultimate. Grace is going to be dishing out some of the best damage in the game, of course behind someone like Ellen, who is a pure DPS unit. The DPS for Grace and Piper are going to be split between them doing high damage and focusing on anomaly buildup, which is two very important things to have, because anomaly buildup is going to allow you to get access to status effects that you wouldn't have if you don't build that focus towards it. Like with Piper, with her getting assault, when triggering the anomaly buildup for physical and you activate assault, enemies just literally lose a chunk of their health because assault was triggered. And then when talking about like a team like with Soldier 11 and Piper, you're going to switch into Piper to be able to activate the attack bonus, and then Soldier, who's going to be dumping out massive DPS. These are just units that are cranking out massive damage, and they're just going to overall be helping with having an additional DPS on the team. This is going to be some of the high damage dealing comps within the game, and you're just going to see them constantly clear ads with no issue. Like honestly, I do believe that the mono ice team at the moment might be seeming like it's the best team, but as we further get along and see more and more people grind out Shiryu defense, I truly believe that the team with Piper, Soldier 11, and Lucy might be a really strong, and I mean a really strong contender with taking that #1 team placement. And then finally, for the last change, we have Corrin. Corrin has moved up from tier 3 to tier 2. Yay! I know for a lot of people that doesn't seem like a really big deal, since tier 3 is like the bottom of the barrel of the game at the moment, and T2 is a bit up, but it still feels essentially leagues behind the other tiers above. But being shifted up is still a really good thing. And when coming up here to see her changes on why she's been moved up, it says that Corrin has moved up from tier 3 to tier 2 after completing Corrin's damage calculations and testing her. It's become clear she has some of the highest burst damage potential in the game during enemy stun window, but only when she has her ultimate and EX special attack available. To offset this strength, however, she has one of, if not the worst, standard rotations in the game. Being so bad, fully executing it without interruption is a serious challenge, and even if you do, its damage is poor. Not using Corrin's standard rotation should be a go-to move, but there are some issues with avoiding it completely. Corrin's EX special, as mentioned earlier, is essential to her burst rotation. Without it, her damage plummets, and unfortunately, it has very high energy cost of 90. Most characters' burst rotations can be done without one or even two of their EXs, filling the remaining time with their standard rotation, or alternatively, they can act as a main fielder for a period of time, executing their standard rotation against a non-stun target to build up resources to ensure they have full energy. Both of these options are bad for Corrin. Playing her main field outside of stun is appealing, and not having her EX ready immediately during the stun window is even worse, meaning she needs a lot of on-field energy regen, where you would need to forego using her burst rotation every time the enemy is stunned. Corrin has high burst damage potential, especially in singular boss encounters, so we're raising her up a tier, but her unwieldy kit and weak standard rotation are preventing us from placing her higher until we or the community comes up with a solution. And after all reading that, you realize that they said more negative than positive about the character. So the only good thing about Corrin when looking at her tier placement is that her burst damage potential, meaning that the highest, if all the stars align and everything works out for Corrin, she is dishing some of the highest damage in the game in a burst instant when an enemy is stunned. But if she doesn't have these stars aligned, if she doesn't reach the checklist in order for her to hit this potential, she becomes a character that falls extremely flat in comparison to the other pure DPS in the game, making her feel like a very finicky unit to have on your team. The only way you can provide this is that if you have a core team built around building energy regen for her, so that whenever she constantly comes on the field, whenever an enemy is stunned, she always has all of her specials available. The only thing with this is such a strict criteria to have for a team to focus on, especially for an A rank unit, that it is honestly not worth it, especially when there's a lot more other flexible units in the game for the pure DPS role. Honestly, to the point that even with this high burst damage potential, I feel like I would still keep her tier 3. I just don't feel like that anybody will be trying to figure out or work towards making that a lot easier for her, unless if you look at her copies, maybe there's something there to help benefit her with that. So with that being said, my overall opinions on this tier list is pretty solid. I think most of the positioning is where I would put some characters, but I would just do some different changes, which I'll try to implement and show you guys right now. Instead of having Sukaku at tier 0, I would still keep her at tier 0.5, unless we are talking about copies of the character, which then I think tier 0 is plausible. Anbi being moved up, I think, is a really good decision, as she has shown that she is a very valuable unit, even if you don't have her additional buff supply when having another element on the team or a cutting hair member. But because there are other strong electric units within the game, like Reyna, like Grace, and I will even debate Anton is a really good 4-star DPS unit, she just has a lot of value, but being a part of different flexible team comps within the game, making her really strong. Then we have Nicole, which I believe Nicole is somebody that is always believed to have potential and have value within the game, and so moving her up to tier 1 makes a lot of sense, especially because the defensive reduction means a lot and allows a lot of DPS units on the game to do a lot more damage. And then once Zhu Young comes in the game, I think that even solidifies her T1 position even more, because she finally has another ether unit to benefit from her additional ability buff. And then we have the girls, Lucy and Piper, both from the Sons of Khaldun. Though these girls are really good units to have on your account, because Lucy, for one, have the whole flat out 600 attack buff, and she's able to consistently get that without having much of any on-field time at all. This is a unit that you're going to get so much value from them from just getting one pull of them, but once we have going into the future, we're able to get copies of her. She's going to have even much more insane flexible value for her. So I definitely think that this T1 placement is definitely deserving. And then Lucy, Anamoly DPS, these are going to be the future of the game. I think once we get more units like this and we see how strong the Anamoly DPS class can be, these characters are going to be some of the main units you're going to primarily be seeing at the end game for Shiyu defense, because of how much value they provide for a team and how much damage they can do, even though they aren't a pure DPS, which is completely insane. And then Corrin, I would have kept her tier 3. I honestly don't think that she needed to be moved up, but hey, if they believe her burst window damage is that good, even though it's super inconsistent, I guess move her up. But honestly, the super inconsistency for me and the fact that she's such a slow unit like Sukaku, I just would have kept her T3. I would have kept her T3. But other than that, that is the tier list. That is the new updated tier list for Zenless Zone Zero. I hope you guys did enjoy this video, and maybe you guys let me know how do you feel about a lot of these changes in the future, for the future of the game, when it comes to tier list placements and how strong characters are. Do you guys agree with the current changes that Prydwen made, or do you agree with more of my thought process? Or maybe you guys have your own way of thinking on where characters are placed. Let me know in the comment section below. I would love to hear you guys' thought. I appreciate you guys and all your love and support, and remember to believe in you that believes in yourself. I'll see you guys in the next one.